In the untamed heart of 1879 Montana, no one dared bid on the silent Shoshone girl until one lone rancher stepped forward. What began as compassion soon turned into a forbidden love that defied every rule of the old frontier. Subscribe for more hidden tales of Western romance. Like, share, and follow for the next chapter. In 1879, the Montana sun blazed down like a furnace over the stark plains, scorching the air and casting everything in hues of amber and grit. The trading post stood on the outskirts of a frontier settlement, its weathered sign groaning in the dry breeze. In a dusty clearing, a crowd of cattlemen, prospectors, and drifters had gathered, hardened men who'd seen too much and felt too little. At the center was a crude auction platform, rough-hewn and splintered, where a man in a tattered vest hollered prices over the uneasy hum of the crowd. "Half price for the Shoshone girl!" His voice cut through the stillness. Eyes turned to the young woman beside him, small, motionless, draped in a faded shawl. Her head was lowered, her face partly veiled by dark braids, her expression a mystery. The heat shimmered around her, but she stood unyielding. No one stirred. The men shuffled, boots scuffing the dirt. Someone coughed. "No use for one of them," a voice grumbled. Another laughed. "They don't speak, don't smile, don't obey." Yet there was something in her silence, something that unnerved them. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't weeping. She stood tall, even in chains. Her wrists bore faint scars from ropes. Her skin was sun-warmed, but pale beneath the dust. The auctioneer mopped his brow, his tone growing frantic. "Half price," he shouted again, scanning the crowd. "She can cook, clean, sturdy for her size." But the crowd's gazes slipped away. To them, she was a ghost of a war they wanted buried. The girl's eyes drifted over the faces before her, each one cold, indifferent, or sneering. Deep inside, her heart quaked, but she held her ground. She'd been taught that silence was strength. Her people, once fierce and free, had been crushed into submission. Now she was being sold like cattle, her value counted in coins. She drew a slow breath, the scent of sweat and earth filling her lungs. The voices merged into a dull drone. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. For a moment, she wished the ground would open and claim her. But pride, that sacred spark of her ancestors, refused to fade. She would not crumble before these men. She would not let them see her pain. Then, just as the auctioneer began to fold his list and step down, a voice rose from the crowd's edge. A steady, quiet voice. "I'll take her." The words cut through the clamor like a knife. Heads turned. The speaker was a tall rancher, his face shadowed by a battered hat. His clothes were simple, worn boots, a dust-caked jacket, and a pistol resting lightly at his hip. He stepped forward slowly, his spurs clinking against the wooden boards. The auctioneer blinked, startled. "You'll take her?" The rancher nodded once. "Name's Elias Kane. I'll pay the price." The crowd muttered, some chuckling under their breath. "Mad fool, buyin' trouble." Elias ignored them. His eyes met the girl's. Dark, deep, unreadable eyes that seemed to hold tempests within. For a long moment, neither looked away. Something passed between them. Fragile, but real. He reached into his jacket and dropped a handful of silver coins into the auctioneer's palm. The sharp clink sealed the deal. The auctioneer shrugged, glad to be done with her, and stepped back. Elias gestured for her to follow. She paused, then took a careful step down from the platform, her bare feet grazing the warm earth. The crowd's stares trailed her like hounds as she passed. As they left the post, the whispers faded behind them. Elias led his horse by the reins, offering her the canteen slung on the saddle. "You thirsty?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, just studied him, then the water, before finally taking it. Her movements were delicate, precise, guarded. He watched her drink, slow, careful sips, before she handed it back. He noticed her hands trembling faintly, and said nothing. He wasn't sure why he'd stepped forward. Pity? Instinct? Or something deeper? Something he couldn't name? All he knew was her eyes had stopped him dead, a sorrow he couldn't turn away from. The trail stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. Elias kept his pace slow, letting her walk beside the horse. She didn't speak, didn't look back, only clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The prairie wind teased her hair, revealing faint scars along her collarbone, marks of a fight she'd endured. Elias's chest tightened. He knew what frontier life did to people, how cruelty carved wounds deeper than knives. Yet there was something in her, something unbroken, a quiet fire that commanded respect. He decided then, whatever had come before, she would be safe now. By dusk, they reached a small camp nestled in a valley. Elias built a fire, its light dancing across the stones. He offered her a tin plate of beans and cornbread. She sat across from him, wary, her eyes never leaving his hands. "You got a name?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. The fire snapped, filling the quiet. He didn't press. Out here, trust wasn't demanded. It was earned. He leaned back, watching the sparks drift into the night sky. Maybe she didn't speak English. Or maybe she'd lost faith in men altogether. Either way, he'd wait. Yo, we're just getting started with this tale. Smash that like and subscribe to keep up. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments. The girl watched him silently. He didn't leer like the others. He didn't bark or demand. His eyes, though weary, were kind. For the first time in months, she felt a faint whisper of safety. The flames gleamed in her eyes as she murmured something under her breath, a word from her mother's tongue, a prayer for the spirits to guide her. Elias didn't hear it, but he saw her lips move and gave a small nod. Somewhere between the fire's warmth and the chill of the prairie wind, two wounded souls sat across from each other. Strangers bound by fate, both uncertain of what lay ahead. The long trail to Elias's ranch stretched across endless miles of red earth and open sky. The sun dipped low behind the ridges, turning the horizon into a ribbon of flame. Lyra rode quietly behind him on a spare horse, her form small against the vast landscape. She never complained, never asked to stop. Her silence was absolute, not just from fear, but from something deeper. Elias had seen tough men crack under less, yet this girl carried her pain like a shield. He offered her jerky and hardtack when they paused, but she took only what she needed. He noticed how her eyes scanned the horizon, as if tracing every contour of the land, as if she feared forgetting who she was. By the second night, they camped near a creek lined with willows. The soft rustle of leaves mingled with the stream's murmur against the rocks. Elias lit a fire and handed her a tin mug of coffee. She hesitated, sniffing it before taking a sip. Her hands shook slightly as she held the mug near the flames. Elias watched in silence. He'd met Shoshone before, traders, guides, even fighters. But she was different. There was a dignity in her movements, something regal, like she'd been raised for more than just survival. He wondered about her past, but didn't ask, not yet. That night, with the stars spilling across the sky, Elias spoke. "What's your name?" His voice was low, cautious, as if he feared shattering something delicate. She didn't answer first, her gaze fixed on the firelight flickering in her eyes. Then, after a long pause, her lips parted. "Lyra," she whispered, the sound soft, almost swallowed by the fire's crackle. Elias repeated it softly. "Lyra." It felt like a vow. For a brief moment she looked at him, and in that fleeting glance he saw a spark. Fear, grief, but also defiance. She quickly turned away, tucking something beneath her shawl. He pretended not to notice. When dawn broke, Lyra was up before him, already tending the horses. She moved with purpose, though she'd never been shown his methods. Elias watched from the fire, sipping his coffee, quietly impressed. "You've done this before," he said, half to himself. She didn't reply, but he thought he caught the ghost of a smile flicker across her lips. As the day wore on, they traveled in silence again, the land unfolding in gentle slopes and gorges. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here, not as a captive, not as a servant, but as someone caught between two worlds, neither of which truly claimed her. That evening, a storm swept in fast from the east. Thunder rumbled through the hills as the wind carried the scent of rain. Elias guided her toward a rocky outcrop for shelter. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating her face, calm, unafraid. When the rain began to pour, she reached under her shawl and pulled out a small copper amulet tied with leather. Elias leaned closer, curiosity sparking in his eyes. She held it out for him to see, a circle etched with intricate tribal patterns. "My father," she said softly. "He was a leader." The words hung heavy like the storm itself. Elias stared, stunned. "You're a chief's daughter." She nodded once, her eyes distant. "Taken, when soldiers came. They burned everything. I hid, but they found me." Elias's chest tightened. He'd heard tales of raids, of soldiers torching villages in the name of order, but to see the human toll sitting before him, it struck deeper. He looked at the amulet again, realizing it wasn't a mere trinket. It was heritage, honor, blood. "You should have been free," he murmured. Lyra's eyes met his. "No one is free," she said quietly. "Not you, not me." Her words hit like a truth he hadn't faced. For a long time they sat in silence, the storm cleansing the dust from the world around them. When the rain eased, Elias offered his jacket. "You'll get sick," he said. She hesitated, then took it. Their hands brushed briefly, and in that moment, something shifted. He saw not a stranger, not a captive, but a woman who had lost everything, yet stood unbroken. She saw not an enemy, but a man who looked at her without scorn or pity. That silent bond, fragile and unspoken, became the start of something neither could define. As their journey continued, Elias found himself wanting to hear her laugh, to know what her voice sounded like without fear. Days passed. Lyra began helping around the ranch, caring for horses, hauling water, cooking by the fire. Elias caught her humming sometimes as she worked, soft Shoshone melodies that drifted across the open air. They spoke little, but words weren't needed. Her presence eased the lonely quiet that had haunted his home for years. At night, she'd sit on the porch, gazing at the stars. "You ever miss home?" he asked once. She looked up. "Every day." "Think you'll go back?" he pressed. She shook her head. "There's nothing left." Elias nodded, knowing too well the weight of loss. One evening, he caught her tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick, patterns like those on her amulet. "What's that mean?" he asked softly. She looked at him. "Harmony between my people and yours. My father dreamed of it before he died." Elias was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe it starts here." She didn't reply, but her eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled. A real smile, fragile but radiant. It was enough to make his heart ache. Weeks turned to months. Lyra's laughter, once unheard, began to ripple through the ranch like the chime of bells after a storm. Elias found himself watching her as she worked, the way she moved, the way her eyes brightened when the horses neared. She was still quiet, but her silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was calm, strong, deliberate. One night, by the fire, Elias reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, and the silence between them spoke louder than words ever could. In the vast loneliness of the old frontier, two souls once shattered had found something worth holding on to, something that needed no permission, no name. In time, the townsfolk stopped whispering about the Shoshone girl. They began to see what Elias had seen from the start. Not a captive, not an outsider, but a woman of quiet strength and fierce grace. And though the world around them remained divided by fear and pride, their love stood like a campfire in the dark, small but steadfast, a light that refused to fade. Wow, what a journey, right? If this story touched your heart, give it some hype, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and drop a comment to let me know what you thought. Let's keep these untold stories alive together.